The wind howled through the dense trees of Blackwood Valley as Elias Richter, a wealthy businessman in his polished suit, adjusted his cufflinks with cold precision. His twin nephews, Leo and Noah, sat side by side in their wheelchairs, their small hands gripping the armrests. Their unseeing blue eyes stared blankly ahead, unaware of the danger creeping closer. Elias had brought them here under the pretense of a special therapy session. Fresh mountain air, he had said, good for their condition, but the truth was far darker. With their parents gone, the twins were the last obstacles between him and the Richter fortune. The will stated that if anything happened to them, everything would go to him. "Uncle Elias," Leo said softly, tilting his head as if sensing something wrong. "Why does it feel like we're near the edge?" Elias forced a laugh, stepping behind their chairs. "Nonsense, boys. The doctor said the altitude might feel strange at first." His fingers tightened around the handles of their wheelchairs. One push, that was all it would take. But what he didn't see, what he couldn't have known, was the pair of watchful eyes glowing in the shadows. A massive German shepherd, his fur dark as midnight, stood rigid between the trees. Maximum. The dog had been their mother's loyal companion before her sudden death. And now, as Elias leaned forward to shove the twins toward the cliff, Max's muscles coiled, ready to strike. Just as the wheels began to roll, a deep, thunderous growl cut through the air. Elias froze. Before he could react, a blur of black fur lunged, not at him, but at the wheelchairs. Max clamped his powerful jaws onto the backrests, yanking them backward with a force that sent Elias stumbling. The twins gasped as their chairs jerked away from the deadly drop. Elias's face twisted in fury. "You stupid mutt!" he hissed, pulling a small knife from his pocket. But Max didn't back down. He planted himself firmly between the twins and their uncle, lips curled, teeth bared, a silent promise. "Try it." The wind howled again, carrying the distant sound of an approaching engine. Someone was coming. Elias's eyes darted between Max and the road, his plan unraveling. He had minutes, maybe seconds, before everything blew up in his face. And Max? He didn't move an inch. Because this wasn't just a rescue. This was revenge. The roar of the approaching engine grew louder, cutting through the tense silence like a blade. Elias's grip on the knife tightened, his knuckles turning white. He had planned everything so carefully. The fake medical reports, the staged accident, even the alibi. But he hadn't accounted for the dog. Her dog. Max stood like a living barrier, his amber eyes locked onto Elias with an intelligence that felt almost human. Leo and Noah, still trembling from the sudden jolt of their wheelchairs being pulled back, reached out blindly toward each other. Their fingers found one another's, squeezing tight. "Max?" Noah whispered, his voice shaky. The German shepherd's ears twitched at the sound of his name, but he didn't turn away from Elias. A low, continuous growl rumbled in his chest, a warning that needed no translation. Elias took a step forward, testing. Max lunged just an inch, enough to make Elias stumble back. The knife glinted in the fading sunlight, but the dog didn't flinch. He had faced worse. The engine noise stopped abruptly, followed by the slam of a car door. Footsteps crunched on gravel, hurried and heavy. Elias's breath hitched. Too soon. He had timed this perfectly. No witnesses, no interruptions. But now his carefully constructed plan was collapsing. "Elias?" A woman's voice rang out, sharp with suspicion. Clara, the twins' former nanny, emerged from the trees, her face pale with shock. Behind her was Dr. Hartman, the family physician, his medical bag clutched tightly in one hand. They weren't supposed to be here. No one was supposed to be here. Clara's eyes darted from Elias to the twins, then to Max, who still hadn't moved from his protective stance. Her lips parted in disbelief. What the hell is going on? Elias's mind raced. He could still salvage this. A lie, an excuse, anything. He forced a smile, sliding the knife back into his pocket. The boys were getting restless. I thought some fresh air would help. Max here got a little overexcited. Noah's small hand tightened around Leo's. "That's not true," he said, his voice quiet but firm. Uncle Elias was pushing us toward the edge. Max stopped him. A beat of silence. Clara's face drained of color. Dr. Hartman's grip on his bag tightened. Elias laughed. Too loud, too forced. Children's imaginations, you know how they are. Blind, scared, confused. Max snarled, cutting him off. The sound was so raw, so full of fury, that even Elias flinched. Clara stepped forward, her voice trembling with rage. "You monster!" Elias's mask slipped. His jaw clenched, his eyes darting between them, calculating. He could still turn this around. He had money, influence, a few well-placed threats, and this would all go away. But then, Dr. Hartman spoke, his voice quiet but deadly. "Clara came to me with her suspicions weeks ago. We've been watching you, Elias, and we found something interesting in your study." He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded document. "Your sister's will. The real one. Not the forged version you submitted to the courts." Elias's blood ran cold. Clara's voice was steel. "It leaves everything to the boys, not you, never you." For the first time, Elias looked afraid. His carefully constructed world was crumbling. He took a step back, then another. Max's growl deepened. He didn't need words to say what everyone was thinking. "You're not getting away." The tension in the air was so thick it could have been cut with Elias's hidden knife. His carefully constructed facade of the concerned uncle had shattered completely, revealing the cold, calculating man beneath. His eyes darted between Clara, Doctor, Hartman, and the growling German shepherd that stood like a furry sentinel between him and the twins. The document in Dr. Hartman's hand might as well have been a death sentence for Elias's plans. Leo, though blind, sensed the shift in the atmosphere. His small fingers dug into the armrests of his wheelchair as he turned his head toward the voices. "Clara, is that really you?" The relief in his voice was palpable, mixed with lingering fear from what had nearly happened moments before. Clara rushed to the twins, dropping to her knees beside their wheelchairs, her hands trembling as she checked them over. "I'm here, sweethearts. You're safe now." Her voice broke on the last word, the horror of what could have happened still fresh in her mind. Noah reached out blindly until his hand found Max's fur. The dog immediately leaned into the touch, his growl softening momentarily to reassure the boy. "Max saved us," Noah whispered, his fingers curling into the thick coat. "He knew. He always knows." There was something eerie in how the dog had appeared at just the right moment, as if he'd been waiting for this very confrontation. Elias's mind raced through escape routes. The road was blocked by Clara's car, and the dense forest surrounding them would be difficult to navigate quickly. His gaze flicked to the knife in his pocket, then to Max's watchful eyes. The dog's lips curled back, revealing sharp canines as if he could read Elias's thoughts. A silent challenge passed between man and beast. One wrong move, and those teeth would sink in without hesitation. Dr. Hartman took a step forward, his normally kind eyes hardened with disgust. "We've already contacted the authorities, Elias. They'll be here any minute. There's no running from this." He held up the will, its crisp pages fluttering slightly in the breeze. "Your sister suspected you. That's why she hid the real will and left copies with people she trusted. Did you really think you could get away with it?" Elias's jaw clenched. He had underestimated his sister even in death. She had always been too soft, too trusting, or so he had thought. But this was a move worthy of a Richter. A bitter laugh escaped him. She never understood business, never understood that sentimentality is weakness. His voice dripped with contempt as he glared at the twins. They're just useless burdens, blind, helpless. What good are they to the family name? Max's growl turned into a snarl so fierce that even Clara flinched. The dog took a step forward, his body coiled like a spring. It was clear he was done listening. But then, a sound that none of them expected. A child's voice, small but defiant, cut through the tension. "We're not useless." It was Leo, his chin lifted, his sightless eyes somehow burning with determination. "Mom told us stories about our family, the real stories, not the ones you made up." His grip tightened on Noah's hand. "She said Richters protect each other. That's why Max is here, because she knew you'd try something like this." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Max's ears pricked up, his focus shifting slightly toward the twins as if in confirmation. Elias's face twisted in fury. He took a sudden step forward. Whether to lunge at the twins, Clara, or the doctor, no one would ever know. Because at that exact moment, Max moved. The German shepherd launched himself at Elias with a speed that blurred his form. Elias barely had time to raise his arms before 90 pounds of furious muscle and teeth slammed into him, knocking him to the ground. The knife clattered onto the rocks, skidding out of reach. Elias screamed, more in shock than pain, as Max stood over him, his muzzle inches from the man's throat. Hot breath washed over Elias's face, carrying the unspoken promise. "Move, and I finish this." In the distance, the wail of sirens cut through the valley. Clara let out a shuddering breath, pulling the twins closer. "It's over," she whispered. But as the sound of approaching police cars grew louder, one question lingered in the air, unspoken but heavy with implication. How much had their mother known? And more importantly, what else had she planned from beyond the grave? The sirens grew louder, their wailing echoing through the valley like a chorus of judgment. Elias lay frozen beneath Max's imposing frame, the dog's breath hot against his neck. Every slight twitch of Elias's muscles was met with a warning rumble from deep in Max's chest, a sound that promised violence if he dared to move. Clara kept her arms wrapped protectively around Leo and Noah, her eyes darting between the approaching police lights and the scene before her. None of them had expected things to escalate this far, this fast. Dr. Hartman moved first, snatching the fallen knife from the ground before Elias could even think of reaching for it. His fingers trembled slightly as he examined the blade, polished, sharp, clearly not something a man carried for innocent reasons. "You were really going to kill them," he murmured, more to himself than anyone else. The reality of what had almost happened settled over them like a suffocating blanket. If Max hadn't been there, if Clara and the doctor had arrived just minutes later. Noah's small voice broke the silence. "Clara, where did Max come from?" "He disappeared after Mom ... He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. It had been months since their mother's sudden death, and in the chaos of grief and Elias's swift takeover of the estate, no one had questioned the absence of her loyal German shepherd. Until now. Clara hesitated, her grip tightening around the twins. "I don't know, sweetheart, but I think—" Before she could finish, Max's ears suddenly swiveled toward the tree line. His body tensed, though he didn't loosen his hold on Elias. A second later, a figure emerged from the shadows. A woman, her face obscured by the hood of a dark coat. She moved with purpose, her boots crunching over the gravel as she approached. Clara instinctively pulled the twins closer, her heart pounding. Who else had Elias involved in this? Then the woman lowered her hood. Recognition flashed across Dr. Hartman's face first. "Sophie?" the twins gasped in unison. "Aunt Sophie?" Elias's eyes widened in pure, unadulterated shock. His sister, their mother's twin, had been presumed dead for years. A hiking accident in the mountains, a body never recovered. Yet here she stood, alive, her sharp green eyes fixed on Elias with a mix of disgust and grim satisfaction. "You!" Elias choked out, his voice strangled. This is impossible." Sophie's lips curled into a humorless smile. "You always underestimated the women in this family, Elias." She stepped forward, her gaze flicking briefly to Max, who finally eased his stance, but only slightly, as if he recognized her, as if he'd been waiting for her. Clara's mind reeled. Sophie Richter had been the black sheep of the family, the one who'd left years ago after a bitter fallout with Elias over the family business. Their mother had rarely spoken of her, but the twins had seen the photos. Two identical sisters, one warm and nurturing, the other fierce and unyielding. Sophie knelt beside the twins, her hands gentle as she cupped their faces. "You look so much like her," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Then to Clara and Doctor. "Hartman, I've been watching, waiting. I knew he'd try something like this eventually." Elias let out a strangled laugh. "You planned this? All of it?" Sophie straightened, her expression turning icy. "Not the way you think. Anna, my sister, their mother, she suspected you long before she died. That's why she sent Max away, to protect him from you. And that's why she hid the real will." She glanced at Dr. Hartman, then back to Elias. But she didn't just leave it with them. She left a trail, one only I could follow. The pieces clicked together in Clara's mind. The sudden reappearance of Max, the way he'd known exactly where to be, when to strike. The twins' mother hadn't just trusted a dog to protect her children, she'd trusted her sister. The police cars skidded to a halt a few yards away, officers spilling out with weapons drawn. But before they could intervene, Sophie reached into her coat and pulled out a small, sealed envelope. "This is for the authorities," she said calmly, handing it to the nearest officer. "It details Elias's financial crimes, the forgeries, and—" her voice hardened, "his involvement in my sister's death." Elias's face went white. "You can't prove anything." Sophie's smile was razor-sharp. "Anna kept diaries, and unlike you, she never underestimated me." As the officers hauled Elias to his feet, his protests fading into the background, Leo turned his face toward Sophie. "Aunt Sophie, does this mean you're staying?" For the first time, Sophie's stern expression softened. She placed a hand on Max's head, the dog leaning into her touch with quiet devotion. "Yes," she said simply, "I'm staying." But as the chaos settled and the twins were led to safety, one question burned in Clara's mind. What else was hidden in Anna Richter's diaries? And more importantly, what other secrets was Sophie still keeping? The police station buzzed with an electric tension as Elias was processed, his expensive suit now wrinkled and his carefully styled hair disheveled. Through the interrogation room's one-way glass, Sophie watched him with an unreadable expression, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Clara sat nearby with the twins, her hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee she hadn't touched. The warmth did nothing to chase away the chill that had settled in her bones since the cliffside. Dr. Hartman had stayed behind at the estate with Max, insisting the twins needed to be checked over properly after the ordeal. But Clara knew the truth. He wanted to go through Anna's diaries without an audience. The doctor had been closer to Anna than anyone realized, and the grief in his eyes when Sophie mentioned her sister's death hadn't gone unnoticed. Noah fidgeted in his seat, his small fingers tracing the rim of his braille watch. "Clara," he whispered, leaning toward her, "Aunt Sophie said Mom knew Uncle Elias would try to hurt us, but how?" His voice wavered, the weight of the question pressing down on him. Leo, though silent, tilted his head slightly, waiting for an answer Clara didn't have. Sophie turned away from the glass, her sharp green eyes softening as they landed on the twins. "Your mother was smarter than anyone gave her credit for," she said, moving to crouch in front of them. "Especially when it came to Elias." She hesitated, then reached into her pocket and pulled out a small silver key. This was hidden in Max's collar. "It opens a safe deposit box at the bank. Inside, there's more. Proof of what Elias did and why." Clara's breath caught. "You mean her death wasn't an accident?" Sophie's jaw tightened. "Number." And Anna knew he'd come for the boys next. She glanced back at Elias, now slumped in his chair behind the glass, his lawyer whispering frantically in his ear. But she made sure he wouldn't succeed. The door to the station burst open, and a uniformed officer hurried in, his face pale. "Ma'am," he said to Sophie, "you need to see this." He held out a file, crime scene photos from Anna's car accident months prior. Clara's stomach twisted as Sophie flipped through them, her expression darkening. "These weren't in the original report," Sophie muttered. She tapped one photo, a close-up of the car's brake lines. Severed, clean-cut. Elias hadn't just wanted the twins dead, he'd already killed once. Leo's small hand found Clara's sleeve, his voice barely audible. "He hurt, Mom?" The pain in those two words shattered something in Clara's chest. She pulled both boys close, her mind racing. If Elias was capable of murdering his own sister, what else was he hiding? Sophie straightened, her voice low and urgent. "We need to get to that safe deposit box, now." But as they moved toward the door, the station's phone rang. The officer who answered paled further, his eyes darting to Sophie. "It's the bank," he said. "Someone's already there trying to access Anna Richter's box." Sophie's face went deadly calm. "Elias's lawyer," she breathed. Then she was moving, shoving the photos into Clara's hands. "Stay with the boys. Don't let anyone near them." As Sophie sprinted out, Clara's grip tightened on the twins, because one terrible thought echoed in her mind. If Elias had an accomplice, then none of them were safe. And Max wasn't here to protect them this time. The bank's polished marble floors reflected the harsh fluorescent lights as Sophie sprinted through the revolving doors, her breath coming in short, sharp bursts. The receptionist at the police station had given her the name. Hargrove, Elias's slick corporate lawyer, and the timing was too precise to be coincidence. Someone had tipped him off. Someone who knew about the safe deposit box. The bank manager, a nervous man with thinning hair, stood wringing his hands near the vault entrance. "Miss Richter, I tried to delay him, but he had the paperwork, the authorization forms." Sophie didn't wait for the rest. She shoved past him, her boots clicking against the tile as she stormed toward the private viewing rooms. Through the glass partition of room 3, she saw him. Hargrove, in his tailored suit, carefully sifting through a stack of documents from Anna's box. A small, fireproof case sat open on the table beside him. Sophie didn't knock. She threw the door open with enough force to make Hargrove jerk upright, his expensive pen clattering to the table. "Those don't belong to you," Sophie said, her voice dangerously calm. Hargrove recovered quickly, adjusting his glasses with a practiced smile. "Ms. Richter, a pleasure. I'm simply executing my client's legal rights to—" "Your client is a murderer." Sophie stepped forward, her gaze locked onto the documents. One page stood out. A life insurance policy, Elias listed as the sole beneficiary. Another showed wire transfers to an offshore account, dated the week before Anna's accident. But it was the small black notebook at the bottom of the pile that made Sophie's blood run cold. Anna's handwriting. Hargrove followed her stare and subtly shifted his arm to block her view. "I'm afraid you're mistaken. These are just routine financial." Sophie moved faster than he expected. She snatched the notebook, flipping it open to a random page. Anna's neat script filled the lines, but one sentence jumped out. "Elias asked about the boys' trust funds again. He doesn't know about the clause. If anything happens to me, Sophie gets custody. He can't touch them." Sophie's hands trembled. She'd known Anna distrusted Elias, but this was proof she'd been planning for the worst. Hargrove's smile vanished. He reached for the notebook. "That's confidential." A deep, familiar growl cut him off. Sophie turned just as Max shouldered his way into the room, his fur bristling, teeth bared. The bank manager yelped and scrambled back. Even Hargrove went pale, his polished demeanor cracking. How did that dog get in here?" he stammered. Sophie didn't answer. She didn't need to. Max had always had a knack for appearing when he was needed most. He circled the table, his amber eyes never leaving Hargrove, until the lawyer was effectively trapped between him and Sophie. Sophie flipped to the last entry in the notebook, dated the day before Anna's death. "Met with Dr. Hartman today. He confirmed it. The medication Elias brought me is wrong. Not just a mistake. Sabotage. I've hidden the pills as evidence. If I don't make it, Sophie will know where to look." The words blurred as Sophie's vision swam with rage. It hadn't just been the car. Elias had been poisoning his own sister. Slowly, methodically. She looked up, her voice barely above a whisper. "Where are the pills?" Hargrove's throat bobbed. "I don't know what you're—" Max lunged. Not to bite, but to snap. His teeth clicking together inches from Hargrove's hand. The lawyer jerked back with a shout, knocking over his chair. "Last chance," Sophie said, cold as steel. "Where are they?" Hargrove caved. Elias kept them. In his study, behind the— He cut himself off, realizing too late what he'd admitted. Sophie didn't wait to hear more. She stuffed the notebook into her jacket and turned to leave, Max at her heels. But as she reached the door, Hargrove called after her, his voice shaking with something like desperation. "You don't understand what you're dealing with. Elias isn't working alone." Sophie paused. "Who else is involved?" Hargrove's lips pressed into a thin line, then quietly, "Ask Dr. Hartman why he really came to the cliff today." The words hit like a physical blow. Hartman? The man who'd helped them? Who Anna had trusted? Sophie's mind raced. If Hartman was involved, then Clara and the twins were alone with him right now, and Max wasn't there to protect them. The tires of Sophie's car screeched against the gravel as she swerved into the Richter estate driveway, Max leaning forward in the passenger seat with his ears pricked. The house loomed ahead, its grand windows dark except for a single light in the study. The same room Hargrove had mentioned. Sophie's fingers tightened around the steering wheel. If the pills were still there, they'd be undeniable proof of Elias's crimes. But Hargrove's warning echoed louder in her mind. Ask Doctor Hartman why he really came to the cliff today. She killed the engine and turned to Max. "Find the boys, stay with them." The dog didn't hesitate. He bolted from the car, a black streak disappearing into the shadows toward the side entrance where Clara usually took the twins. Sophie went straight for the study, her boots crunching over the gravel. The house was too quiet. No voices, no sounds of the twins laughing or Clara fussing over them. Just the distant hum of the refrigerator and the creak of old floorboards underfoot. Sophie's hand drifted to the knife sheathed at her belt, a habit from years spent in places where trust was a luxury. The study door was slightly ajar. Sophie pushed it open slowly, her eyes scanning the room. At first glance, nothing seemed out of place. The mahogany desk, the leather-bound books, the portrait of the Richter family hanging above the fireplace. Anna's face smiled down at her, frozen in time. Then she saw it. The painting was slightly crooked, as if someone had recently bumped it. Sophie crossed the room in 3 strides and lifted the frame away from the wall. Behind it was a small safe, its digital keypad glowing faintly. "Damn it," she muttered. She didn't have the code. A floorboard creaked behind her. Sophie spun, knife already in hand, just as Dr. Hartman stepped into the doorway. His usually kind eyes were shadowed, his posture tense. In one hand, he held a syringe. "Sophie," he said, too calmly, "I didn't expect you back so soon." Sophie didn't lower the knife. Hargrove talked. Hartman sighed, as if disappointed. Elias always said he'd crack under pressure. He took a step forward, the syringe glinting in the dim light. "You shouldn't have come back. The boys were safe with Clara. They could have lived happily, never knowing the truth." Sophie's blood ran cold. "You helped him kill Anna." Hartman's mouth twisted into something bitter. "I saved her, for years. The cancer would have taken her within months if I hadn't intervened. Elias just sped things up." He adjusted his grip on the syringe. "He promised me the research wing at the hospital, funding for my work. All I had to do was make sure Anna's death looked natural." Sophie's grip on the knife tightened. "And the boys?" Hartman's expression flickered. "That was never part of the deal, but Elias got impatient." He took another step. "Put the knife down, Sophie. You don't want to do this." A low growl vibrated through the room. Hartman froze. Max stood in the hallway behind him, his teeth bared, hackles raised. But it wasn't just Max. Leo and Noah stood flanking him, their small hands buried in his fur. Clara hovered behind them, her face pale with shock. "You hurt our mom?" Leo's voice was small but sharp as broken glass. Hartman turned, his composure slipping. "Leo, Noah, it's not what you—" Noah took a step forward, his unseeing eyes somehow piercing. "Max doesn't like you," he said simply. And that was all the warning Hartman got before Max lunged. The syringe clattered to the floor as Hartman stumbled back, arms raised to shield his face. But Max didn't attack. Instead, he planted himself between the doctor and the twins, his growl deepening into something primal. A clear message. Run. Hartman ran. Sophie moved to chase him, but Clara caught her arm. "The police are already on their way. Let them handle it." She nodded to the twins who were clinging to each other, their faces streaked with silent tears. "They need you more." Sophie hesitated, then knelt in front of the boys. "I'm sorry," she whispered, pulling them close. "I'm so sorry." Leo buried his face in her shoulder. "Is it true? About Mom?" Sophie's throat tightened. She didn't want to lie to them. But before she could answer, Noah reached out and touched the crooked painting. "Mom hid things for us," he said softly. "In the music box." Sophie frowned. "What music box?" Noah's fingers traced the edge of the portrait frame. "The one she kept in her bedroom. She said if we ever needed help, we should open it." His small hand paused over the painted locket around Anna's neck in the portrait. "The code is our birthday." Sophie's breath caught. She turned back to the safe and punched in 0615, June 15th, the twins' birthday. The safe clicked open. Inside, nestled beside a bottle of pills labeled with Hartman's handwriting, was a single USB drive, and taped to it a note in Anna's writing. For Sophie. Play this for the police. And remember, some secrets are worth keeping. Sophie didn't understand the last part. Not until she plugged the drive into her laptop later that night and saw the footage. Security tapes from the estate, showing Hartman tampering with Anna's medication. But there was more. Another file, encrypted, labeled S.H., her initials. Sophie's hands shook as she opened it. Because whatever Anna had left for her, it was bigger than Elias. Bigger than Hartman. And it was about to change everything. The encrypted file took Sophie 3 attempts to open. When the password prompt finally accepted Max Guardian, the name Anna had given the German Shepherd as a puppy, the screen flickered to life with a video file. Sophie's breath caught as her sister's face filled the screen, pale but determined, sitting in the very study where Sophie now sat. Anna's fingers trembled slightly as she adjusted the camera, her once vibrant eyes shadowed by illness. If you're watching this, Sophie, then Elias made his move. Anna's voice was weaker than Sophie remembered, but her words were clear. I need you to listen carefully. The pills in the safe are just the beginning. Hartman wasn't acting alone. He's part of something bigger. A group called the Silent Trust. Sophie's stomach dropped. She'd heard that name before years ago, whispered in connection with unsolved disappearances and sudden, convenient deaths among wealthy families. Conspiracy theorists called them puppet masters. Anna coughed, wincing before continuing. They recruit doctors, lawyers, even cops. Their job is to correct family lines, remove unfavorable heirs, so the money stays where they want it. Her gaze flicked to something off-camera, fear flashing across her face. Elias isn't smart enough to lead this, but he's their perfect pawn. They promised him control of the Richter fortune if he eliminated me and the boys. The video glitched. When it stabilized, Anna was holding up a photograph, a group of men in suits at a charity gala. Sophie recognized Elias, Hargrove, and Hartman, but it was the man at the center who made her blood freeze, Senator James Whitlock, a family friend who'd spoken at Anna's funeral. Whitlock runs the Trust's East Coast operations, Anna whispered. He's the one who ordered this. And Sophie, he knows about you. The screen went black for a heartbeat before reopening to show Anna's face again, now streaked with tears. I hid the evidence where only you'd think to look, in Mom's old recipe box, behind the cinnamon rolls recipe you loved. But you can't go to the police. Not yet. Whitlock owns too many of them. She swallowed hard. Take the boys and run. Don't trust anyone except... The video cut off abruptly. Sophie sat frozen, the laptop's glow casting long shadows across the study. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, a storm brewing on the horizon. Max whined softly at her feet, pressing his muzzle into her palm as if sensing her distress. Clara's voice came from the doorway, hesitant. Sophie, the police are here for your statement about Hartman. Sophie slammed the laptop shut. Tell them I'll meet them at the station in an hour. Clara frowned. Where are you going? Sophie was already moving, snatching the USB and striding toward the hall closet where Anna kept her winter coats. Buried beneath scarves was an old, flour-dusted recipe box. Her hands shook as she flipped to the cinnamon rolls card, and there, tucked behind it, was a folded map of the property with a single location circled in red, the old hunting cabin by the lake. Sophie, Clara's voice sharpened. What's wrong? Sophie turned, her face grim. "Pack the boys' essentials. Clothes, medications, anything sentimental. We're leaving tonight." Clara's eyes widened. "But the police can't protect us from this." Sophie grabbed her car keys, her mind racing. If Whitlock was involved, then Elias's arrest would have already triggered alarms. They had hours, maybe minutes, before the trust's net closed around them. Max suddenly stiffened, his head snapping toward the front door. A low growl built in his throat. Sophie didn't hesitate. She yanked open the drawer where Anna kept the antique revolver, empty. A floorboard creaked in the hallway. Not police, not friends. The trust had found them first. The house was too quiet. The kind of silence that pressed against Sophie's eardrums like a physical weight. Max's growl deepened, his body rigid as he stared down the darkened hallway. Clara instinctively pulled Leo and Noah closer, her breath coming in short, panicked bursts. Sophie didn't need to see the intruders to know they were there. The air itself had changed, charged with something predatory. She motioned for Clara and the twins to get behind the heavy oak desk, then reached slowly for the fireplace poker beside her. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. Max took a step forward, his ears flat against his skull, teeth bared. Then footsteps, slow, deliberate. A shadow stretched across the hallway wall first, long and distorted in the dim light. Then the man stepped into view. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a face that would have been unremarkable if not for the cold, empty look in his eyes. He wore a dark suit, impeccably tailored, but Sophie's gaze locked onto the gun holstered at his hip. "Sophie Richter," he said, his voice smooth. "We've been looking for you." Sophie tightened her grip on the poker. "Whitlock send you?" The man's lips twitched, not quite a smile. "Senator Whitlock is a busy man. He doesn't involve himself in cleanups." He took another step forward, and this time, two more figures materialized behind him. A woman with a sleek blonde bob and another man, younger, his hands stuffed casually in his pockets, all armed, all calm. Clara let out a choked sound behind Sophie, her arms wrapped around the twins. Leo's fingers dug into her sleeve. "Sophie," he whispered, his voice trembling. The lead intruder's gaze flicked to the boys, then back to Sophie. "Hand over the evidence and we'll make this quick. The boys won't feel a thing." Something inside Sophie snapped. She moved before she could think, swinging the poker with all her strength. It connected with the man's knee with a sickening crack. He roared in pain, stumbling back, but the woman was already drawing her gun. Max lunged. The German shepherd hit her like a freight train, knocking her to the ground before she could fire. The gun skidded across the floor. The younger man went for it, but Sophie was faster. She snatched it up, her hand steady despite the adrenaline screaming through her veins. "Clara, take the boys and go," she barked, not taking her eyes off the intruders. "Out the back, now." Clara didn't argue. She grabbed Leo and Noah's hands and bolted for the kitchen, the twins' small feet scrambling to keep up. The lead intruder snarled, reaching for his own gun, but Sophie fired first. The shot went wide, embedding itself in the wall, but it was enough to make him freeze. Max had the woman pinned, his teeth inches from her throat. The younger man hesitated, his eyes darting between Sophie and the dog. "You're dead," the lead intruder spat, blood trickling from where he'd bitten his tongue. "All of you, the trust doesn't stop." Sophie's finger tightened on the trigger. "Try me." A deafening bang shattered the tension. Not from Sophie's gun, but from the front door being kicked in. Police? Number worse. Standing in the doorway, his suit rumpled and his face bruised from his arrest, was Elias, and behind him 3 more armed men. Sophie's stomach dropped. He wasn't supposed to be out. He wasn't supposed to be here. Elias's smile was a grotesque parody of warmth. "Hello, sister, miss me?" Max's growl turned into something feral, his focus snapping to Elias. But before the dog could move, the lead intruder barked a laugh. "Took you long enough, Richter." Sophie's blood ran cold. Elias wasn't just a pawn, he was one of them, and he'd been playing them all along. The realization hit Sophie like a physical blow. Elias wasn't just a desperate man trying to steal an inheritance. He was a full-fledged member of the Silent Trust, and he had been orchestrating everything from the beginning. The staged car accident that killed Anna, the slow poisoning, even his own arrest. It had all been part of a larger plan. A plan that was now unfolding with terrifying precision. Elias stepped further into the room, his polished shoes clicking against the hardwood floor. The 3 armed men behind him fanned out, blocking the exits. The lead intruder, the one Sophie had struck with the poker, limped to his feet, his face twisted in pain but his smirk intact. "Took you long enough to get here," he muttered to Elias. Elias shrugged, adjusting his cuffs as if he hadn't just broken out of the police custody. "Had to make it convincing, didn't I?" His gaze slid to Sophie, cold and calculating. "You always were the clever one, Sophie. Anna, too. But cleverness doesn't matter when the game is rigged." Sophie kept the gun trained on him, her mind racing. Clara and the twins had only gotten a minute's head start, if that. They'd be heading for the woods, toward the old hunting cabin Anna had marked on the map. But Elias knew the property as well as she did. He'd find them. Max's growl was a constant, vibrating threat beside her, his body coiled to spring. The woman he'd pinned earlier was still on the ground, her throat exposed, her eyes wide with fear. The younger intruder hadn't moved, his hand still raised slightly, watching the standoff with an eerie calm. Sophie needed to stall. "You killed your own sister," she said, her voice low and rough. "For what? Money? Power?" Elias laughed, the sound hollow. "For the future, Sophie. The trust doesn't just control fortunes, it controls futures. And Anna's boys?" He shook his head. "Blind, weak, a drain on the family name. The trust doesn't tolerate imperfections." Sophie's finger twitched on the trigger. She could shoot him now. 1 bullet right between the eyes. But the other men would gun her down before she could turn the weapon on them, and Max would die trying to protect her. She couldn't let that happen. "So what now?" she asked, buying time. "You kill us all and walk away? The police already know about Hartman, about the pills. They'll connect it back to you." Elias's smile widened. "Oh, Sophie. The police work for us. By morning, the official report will say you kidnapped the boys, murdered Clara in a psychotic break, then turned the gun on yourself." He tilted his head. Tragic, really. The unstable sister finally snapping under the weight of her grief. Sophie's stomach churned. He'd planned this too, every detail, every lie. The lead intruder reached for his own gun, wincing as he put weight on his injured leg. "Enough talking. Where's the evidence?" Sophie hesitated. If she gave it up, they'd kill her immediately. If she didn't, they'd torture her for it. Either way, Clara and the boys were running out of time. Then, a sound. Faint, but unmistakable. A dog barking in the distance. Not Max. Another dog. Elias's head snapped toward the window. "What the hell?" Sophie didn't wait for an explanation. She fired, not at Elias but at the ceiling. The gunshot was deafening in the enclosed space, sending plaster raining down. In the chaos, Max lunged again, this time going straight for Elias's throat. Elias screamed, stumbling back as the German shepherd's teeth sank into his forearm. The armed men reacted instantly, but Sophie was already moving. She dove for the hallway, rolling to her feet just as bullets splintered the doorframe where she'd been standing. She didn't look back. She ran. The woods were a blur as she sprinted toward the sound of barking, branches whipping at her arms and face. Behind her, shouts and another gunshot echoed, but she didn't stop. The cabin. Anna's map had circled the cabin. That was where Clara would have taken the twins. The trees thinned suddenly, revealing the moonlit lake and, on its far shore, the small, dilapidated hunting cabin. The door was slightly ajar. Sophie's heart pounded as she approached, her breath ragged. "Clara," she called softly, pushing the door open further. "It's me." The cabin was dark, the air thick with dust and the scent of old pine. Then, movement. Clara stepped out of the shadows, her face streaked with tears, a kitchen knife clutched in her shaking hands. The twins huddled behind her, their faces pale with fear. "Sophie," Clara breathed, lowering the knife. "Thank God." Sophie didn't have time to explain. "We need to go. Now, Elias is—" A rustling outside cut her off. "Max?" Number. The door burst open, and a massive Rottweiler bounded inside, its tail wagging furiously. Behind it stood a figure Sophie hadn't seen in years, tall, lean, his face scarred from a past he never talked about. Daniel, Anna's ex-husband, the twins' father, the man who'd supposedly abandoned them all 5 years ago. "Daniel?" Sophie whispered, her voice breaking. He didn't smile. His eyes were hard, focused. "We have about 2 minutes before Elias's men find us. There's a boat hidden in the reeds. Let's go." Sophie couldn't move. This didn't make sense. Daniel had left. He'd signed away his rights. Leo's small voice cut through her shock. "Dad?" Daniel's expression softened just for a second. "Hey, buddy, I'm here now." Then he was all business again, ushering them toward the back door. "Sophie, trust me just this once. We need to move." Another gunshot rang out in the distance, closer this time. Sophie made a decision. She grabbed Leo's hand. "Run." The boat was small, barely more than a dinghy, hidden among the tall reeds at the lake's edge. Daniel moved with practiced efficiency, ushering Clara and the twins into it before shoving off from the shore with a grunt. Sophie hesitated for only a second before jumping in, the cold water soaking her boots as the boat rocked violently. Behind them, shouts echoed through the trees, flashlight beams cutting through the darkness like jagged blades. Daniel grabbed the oars and began rowing with quick, powerful strokes, his muscles straining against the current. The Rottweiler, Bruno, Sophie remembered, sat rigid at the bow, his ears pricked forward, watching the shoreline with a low growl. Sophie's mind spun. Daniel was supposed to be gone, really gone. Anna had told everyone he'd abandoned them, that he'd signed away his rights to the twins and vanished. But the way he moved now, like a man who'd been trained for this, told a different story. She turned to him, her voice barely above a whisper. "What the hell is going on, Daniel? Where have you been?" Daniel didn't stop rowing. His jaw was set, his eyes locked on the far shore. "Protecting them," he said simply. Leo's small hand clutched Sophie's sleeve. "Dad used to take us fishing here," he whispered, before he left. Noah, usually so quiet, spoke up. "He didn't leave, did he?" Daniel's grip on the oars tightened. "No, kid, I didn't." Clara's breath hitched. "Anna lied?" The boat hit a rock, jolting them all. Daniel steadied it with one hand, his other reaching into his jacket. He pulled out a small, waterproof folder and tossed it to Sophie. "Open it." Inside were photos, surveillance shots, Elias meeting with Whitlock. Hartman handing over a syringe. And Sophie's stomach twisted. Anna sitting at a cafe with Daniel, her face grim as she passed him a thick envelope. The last photo was the one that made Sophie's blood run cold. A younger Elias shaking hands with a man Sophie recognized instantly, her father. Daniel's voice was quiet. The trust didn't just recruit Elias. They recruited your dad first. He's the one who brought Elias into the fold. Sophie's hand shook. Her father had died when she was 12, a hunting accident. But the date on the photo was years after that. He's alive? She choked out. Daniel didn't answer. Instead, he nodded toward the shore. We're here. The boat scraped against gravel as it landed on the far side of the lake, where the woods thickened into near impenetrable forest. Daniel jumped out first, hauling the boat onto the bank before helping the others. Bruno bounded ahead, sniffing the air before letting out a soft woof, a signal. From the trees emerged two figures, a woman with a rifle slung over her shoulder and a man with a scarred face Sophie vaguely recognized from Interpol bulletins. "Took you long enough," the woman said, her eyes scanning the group before landing on Sophie. "She knows." Daniel nodded. "Now she does." Sophie stepped forward, her patience snapping. "Knows what? Daniel, if you don't start talking—" The man with the scar interrupted. "Your sister was one of us, an informant. She was working with Daniel to take down the trust from the inside." Sophie's breath left her lungs. "Anna?" Daniel's expression was pained. "She found out about your father first, that he'd faked his death to work for the trust full time. She tried to confront him, but—" He trailed off, his gaze flicking to the twins. "He threatened the boys," Sophie finished, her voice hollow. Daniel nodded. "So she came to me. We staged my abandonment so I could work undercover. She stayed behind to gather evidence." His hands clenched. "But Elias got suspicious. He moved faster than we expected." Clara made a small, devastated sound. All this time, she was trying to protect them. A twig snapped in the woods behind them. Bruno's growl deepened. The woman with the rifle cursed. "They're crossing the lake. We need to move." Daniel grabbed Sophie's arm. "There's a safe house 5 miles north. We can make it by dawn if we—" Sophie yanked free. "No!" Everyone froze. She turned to Daniel, her voice steel. "I'm done running. Anna died for this. Those boys almost died for this. The trust doesn't get to win." Daniel's eyes searched hers. "What are you saying?" Sophie reached into her pocket and pulled out the USB, the one from Anna's safe. "She left us a weapon. Now we use it." The scarred man leaned in. "That's evidence, not an army." Sophie smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. "You're wrong. It's a list. Every trust member. Every cop, judge, and politician on their payroll, and—" She tapped the USB, their biggest secret. Daniel frowned. "Which is?" Sophie looked at the twins, then back to him. "Project Lazarus. The reason they wanted Leo and Noah dead in the first place." She turned toward the woods, where the flashlight beams were getting closer. "Now, let's show them what happens when you mess with our family." The forest was alive with movement. Shouts, snapping branches, the occasional bark of Bruno or Max as they circled the group like shadows. Sophie led the way, her boots crunching over frost-covered leaves as she navigated the narrow game trails she and Anna had explored as children. Daniel stayed close behind, his hand resting on the twins' shoulders, guiding them through the dark. Clara and the two strangers, Mira and Victor, they'd introduced themselves, brought up the rear, their weapons drawn but unused. For now. The safe house wasn't a house at all. It was an old ranger station, half buried in the side of a hill. its wooden walls weathered gray by decades of storms. Sophie punched in the code Anna had hidden in the recipe box, 0615 again, the twins' birthday, and the heavy steel door swung open with a groan. Inside was a single room, sparse but functional. A table covered in radio equipment, a wall of monitors showing static-filled security feeds, and a locked cabinet that Sophie knew, without asking, held weapons. Daniel headed straight for the radio. "We need to call in backup," he muttered, adjusting the frequency with practiced fingers. Mira leaned her rifle against the wall and turned to Sophie. "What's Project Lazarus?" Sophie hesitated, then plugged the USB into the computer on the desk. The screen flickered to life, revealing a folder labeled Lazarus. Inside were blueprints, medical reports, and a video file dated just weeks before Anna's death. She clicked it. Anna's face filled the screen, but this wasn't the weak, sickly woman from the previous recording. This Anna was furious, her eyes blazing. "If you're seeing this, Sophie, then Elias and Whitlock have made their move. Project Lazarus is the reason. It's not just about money, it's about control. The Trust has been experimenting on children. Kids with undesirable traits, disabilities, illnesses, anything they deem weak." Her voice cracked. Leo and Noah weren't just targets because they're blind. They were targets because their DNA holds the key to reversing Lazarus's effects. The Trust wants them dead before anyone realizes what they can do. The screen changed, showing a document titled Subjects, Twins, Leo and Noah Richter. Under Observations, one line stood out: "Remarkable neural adaptability, potential for full sensory recalibration." Sophie's breath caught. "They can see?" Daniel's hands clenched into fists. "Not with their eyes." Anna believed their brains had rewired themselves to process the world differently. Heightened hearing, touch, even some kind of spatial awareness we don't understand. He looked at the twins who were sitting quietly on a worn-out couch, their heads tilted as if listening to something no one else could hear. That's why Max and Bruno respond to them the way they do. The dogs feel it. Clara made a small horrified sound. The Trust wanted to kill them for that. Victor, the scarred man, spoke for the first time. Number, they wanted to replicate it. Turn it into a weapon. Enhanced soldiers who don't need night vision goggles or comms. Kids who can see enemies through walls. His lip curled. But the twins were the only successful subjects. The others didn't survive the experiments. A heavy silence settled over the room. Leo and Noah didn't react, but their hands found each other's, fingers intertwining. Sophie stood abruptly. "We're ending this, now." Daniel frowned. "We don't have the firepower to take on the Trust head-on." Sophie pulled a burner phone from her pocket, one she'd grabbed from the safe house supplies. "We don't need to, we just need to expose them." She dialed a number from memory, then put the phone on speaker. It rang twice before a familiar voice answered. "Sophie." "Senator Whitlock." Sophie's voice was ice. "You have 1 hour to resign, to confess, to name every Trust member you've ever worked with. Or I release everything Anna collected to every news outlet in the country." Whitlock laughed, the sound oily. "You have no proof. No one would believe you." Sophie smiled. "You're right, they wouldn't believe me." She nodded to Daniel, who flipped a switch on the radio console. The monitors lit up, showing a live feed. Elias, in the interrogation room, sweating under the harsh lights as a detective slid a piece of paper toward him. But they'll believe him. Elias's voice crackled through the speakers, shaky but clear. "I'll talk. But I want immunity and protection from the Trust." Whitlock's breath hitched. You're bluffing." Sophie leaned closer to the phone. "Check your inbox." A pause, then a string of curses. Sophie had sent him the Lazarus files. All of them. "You'll never make it out of this alive," Whitlock snarled. Sophie glanced at the twins, then at Max and Bruno, their loyal protectors. At Daniel, who'd given up everything to keep his family safe. At Clara, who'd risked her life for children she didn't have to love. "We already have," she said softly, and hung up. Epilogue. The scandal broke at dawn. By noon, Senator Whitlock was in custody. By evening, Elias's confession had led to raids on trust safe houses across 3 states. The Lazarus files made front-page news. The experiments condemned as crimes against humanity. And in a quiet corner of the rebuilt Richter estate, Leo and Noah sat beneath their favorite oak tree, their faces turned toward the sun. Max lay at their feet, his chin resting on Noah's shoe. Bruno dozed nearby. Clara watched them from the porch, her eyes bright. "They're really going to be okay," she murmured. Sophie nodded, sipping her coffee. "Better than okay?" She didn't elaborate. She didn't need to, because as the wind rustled the leaves overhead, Leo suddenly laughed. A sound so pure it made Sophie's heart ache. "The sun looks golden today," he said, his fingers brushing the grass. Noah smiled. "Like Mom's hair." And though neither boy could see with their eyes, Sophie knew. They were seeing more than anyone else ever could. Moral lesson. True strength isn't in power or perfection. It's in the bonds we forge, the love we protect, and the courage to face darkness with nothing but faith in each other. Sometimes, the most extraordinary gifts are hidden in what the world calls weakness. And no force, no trust, no weapon, no shadow can ever extinguish the light of those who refuse to be broken.